Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku bonded with the Phoenix Force and became cosmic beyond limits? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in the unforeseen simulation joint was thick with the coppery tang of blood and the acrid smell of ozone. It was a symphony of destruction, and Izuku Midoriya was its unwilling audience, pinned beneath a slab of shattered concrete, his own body a discordant mess of broken notes. His left arm was a useless, mangled limb, the bone jutting through the torn fabric of his hero costume at a sickening angle. Every ragged breath sent a jolt of agony through what he was certain were at least 3 cracked ribs. One for all, the sacred torch passed to him, felt less like a bonfire in his soul and more like a guttering candle flame, flickering weakly against the hurricane of despair. This was not the triumphant debut of Class 1A. This was a slaughter. The League of Villains had been more than just a rabble of thugs led by a petulant man-child. Their attack was precise, brutal, and horrifyingly effective. Kurojire's warp gates had been wielded with surgical malice, not just scattering the students, but isolating them in a way that maximized terror and minimized their chances of collaboration. The cannon fodder villains were a distraction, a tide of mediocrity designed to wear down their resolve, to exhaust them before the true monster was unleashed. And what a monster it was! It stood in the center of the plaza, a grotesque monument to bioengineered hate. It was larger than the gnome that had attacked All Might in the original timeline he dimly remembered from newsreels. This one was different. Its skin was a bruised purple-black, crisscrossed with thick, pulsing veins that glowed with a sickly yellow light. It had 4 arms, 2 massive and piston-like, 2 smaller and tipped with razor-sharp talons. Its exposed brain was encased in a crystalline shell, and its eyes, 4 of them, arranged in a cruel diamond, glowed with a malevolent, thinking intelligence. Shigaraki had called it Terminus, a fitting name for the end of all hope. Shouta Aizawa, their teacher, the formidable Eraserhead, lay broken at its feet. He had fought like a cornered demon, a whirlwind of capture scarf and cancelled quirks, but Terminus had adapted. It hadn't just relied on brute strength. It had used one of its smaller arms to inject him with a quirk-suppressing neurotoxin before shattering his orbital bone and femur. He was now a bloody, twitching prop in Shigaraki's twisted stage play. Then, All Might had arrived. The symbol of peace had descended with the force of a meteor, his signature "I am here." A booming proclamation that should have signaled salvation. But the hope had curdled into ash almost immediately. Terminus was designed for him. Its primary quirk wasn't just shock absorption, it was power siphon. Every blow All Might landed, every kinetic ounce of one for all he poured into the beast, seemed to only make it stronger. The yellow veins on its body would pulse brighter, its muscles would swell, and its regeneration would accelerate. It was a perfect, horrifying counter. Their battle had leveled the central plaza. The ground was a cratered wasteland. All Might, now in his skeletal form, was on one knee, steam hissing from his body like a dying engine. His breathing was a ragged, wet sound that scraped at Izuku's nerves. One of Terminus's attacks had torn a fresh, gaping wound across his already scarred torso. He was spent. Beaten. "It's over, symbol of peace," Tamura Shigaraki's voice grated from the sidelines, each word dripping with childish glee. He scratched furiously at his neck, flakes of dry skin dusting his dark clothes. "This is the final level. You've reached the boss, but you don't have enough HP. Game over." Izuku tried to move, to push the concrete off his legs. The pain was a white-hot scream that consumed his thoughts. But the image of All Might, his idol, his mentor, about to be extinguished, was a far greater agony. "Get up," he commanded his body. "Get up! Get up! Get up!" His muscles trembled, screamed, and then failed. He was just a broken boy, a failed vessel. Around him, his friends were in no better shape. Kirishima's unbreakable form was cracked and failing. Bakugo was pinned by a dozen lesser villains, his explosions growing weaker. Uraraka and Ajiri were trying to drag Aizawa's unconscious form away, their faces pale with terror. Ida had made a valiant attempt to break through Kurojire's blockade to get help, but the warp villain was a sentient fortress, deflecting him at every turn. They were trapped. They were going to die here. Terminus took a step toward All Might. The ground shuddered. It raised one of its massive fists, the knuckles like boulders, and the air around it shimmered with the stolen, corrupted energy of One for All. All Might looked up, not with fear, but with a profound, soul-crushing regret. His blue eyes, sunken in their sockets, found Izuku's across the plaza. It was a look of apology. "I'm sorry, my boy. I failed you." And in that moment, something inside Izuku Midoriya shattered. It wasn't a bone. It was something deeper. The carefully constructed dam of hope and optimism he had built his entire life. The belief that a hero could always find a way, that sheer willpower could overcome any obstacle. It crumbled into dust. All he was left with was the raw, screaming abyss of his failure. He had been given the world's greatest power, and he was going to watch his world die while he lay helpless in the dirt. The tears that streamed down his face were hot, but the despair was ice cold. It was a cold that leached the very color from the world, leaving only shades of gray in the looming, final blackness of Terminus's fist. He screamed. It was not a sound of pain or fear. It was a sound of pure, undiluted will, a primal howl ripped from the very core of his being. It was the shriek of a soul refusing to accept the end. It contained no words, but it was a prayer, a plea, a bargain, a demand. It was every ounce of his heroic spirit, his selfless, all-consuming desire to save, condensed into a single, desperate broadcast. "Please, anything, anyone. I don't want power for me. I don't want to be the greatest. I just want them to be safe. I just want to save him. Give me the power to save him. Please!" The plea shot out from him, not as sound, but as an incandescent filament of pure intent. It tore through the fabric of the USJ, through the atmosphere of the Earth, through the empty vacuum of space. It raced past planets and stars, past galaxies and nebulae. It was a beacon of pure, selfless compassion in a cosmos often filled with cold indifference, or ravenous hunger. And something answered. Across the infinite gulfs of reality, in the place between universes known as the White-Hot Room, a consciousness stirred. It was ancient beyond the measure of stars, a nexus of all psionic energy, the embodiment of life, death, and rebirth. It was passion given form, creation and destruction in a cosmic dance. It was the Phoenix Force. It had slumbered, content in its role as a silent arbiter of existence. But this call, this was different. It was not the call of a conqueror seeking power. It was not the call of a zealot seeking godhood. It was the call of a heart so pure, so willing to sacrifice itself for others, that it resonated with the Phoenix's own fundamental nature as the fire of life itself. It felt a potential host, not one to be dominated, but one to form a perfect, symbiotic union with. A heart that could temper its infinite rage and channel its boundless life-giving potential. The Phoenix spread its wings of living starlight, and reality itself screamed as it tore a hole through the multiverse. Back in the USJ, the world stopped. One moment, Terminus's fist was inches from All Might's skull. The next, a profound, impossible silence fell. The grunts of villains, the desperate cries of students, the groans of the injured, all of it was snuffed out. An unearthly warmth spread through the dome, a comforting heat that felt like the first sunrise after a long, cold night. Shigaraki paused his scratching. "What the? Kurojiri, is this you?" The misty villain swirled in agitation. "No, Tamara Shigaraki. This is something else. The very air is vibrating." A single point of light appeared in the center of the USJ, high above the plaza. It was no bigger than a pinprick, but it held an intensity that defied the laws of physics. It was brighter than the sun, yet it didn't hurt to look at. It was a pure, golden red that promised both Genesis and Apocalypse. The light expanded. Not like an explosion, but like an unfolding. It bloomed, petal by petal of pure energy, revealing the shape within. A colossal raptor, fashioned from the fire of dying stars and the dust of newborn galaxies. Its feathers were shimmering filaments of cosmic energy, its talons were shards of crystallized time, and its eyes were twin supernovas, holding the wisdom of a billion lifetimes. Every single person in the dome, hero and villain alike, was paralyzed by a primal awe that transcended fear. They were ants witnessing the descent of a mountain. Their quirks, their ambitions, their very lives, felt infinitesimally small in the face of this thing. The Phoenix Force tilted its celestial head, its gaze sweeping over the scene of carnage. It saw the broken bodies, the terrified children, the dying symbol of peace. And it saw the source of the call, the broken boy pinned under the rubble, his green eyes wide, tears still tracking through the grime on his face, his spirit a blazing star of pure empathy. "You," a voice echoed, not in their ears, but in the very center of their minds. It was a voice that was both feminine and masculine, both a whisper and a roar, the sound of a universe becoming self-aware. "You are the one." The fiery bird dove. It didn't move through the air so much as it made the air cease to exist between 2 points. It descended upon Izuku Midoriya in a cascade of celestial fire. The concrete pinning him didn't shatter, it sublimated into fine, harmless dust. The fire washed over him, and for a terrifying second, his friends thought he was being incinerated. But the fire did not burn. It healed. Izuku felt a warmth spread through him that erased all pain. He felt his shattered bones knitting back together, not just healing, but being remade, reinforced with an unknown, stellar alloy. His torn muscles weaved themselves whole. His exhaustion vanished, replaced by a feeling of boundless, infinite energy. One for all, his flickering candle, was suddenly engulfed by a supernova. The embers of the past users within him, which had been a comforting, quiet presence, now roared to life, not in control, but as witnesses to the arrival of a god in their shared soul space. His mind, however, was a different story. It was a flood. He was experiencing the birth of a star, the lonely drift of a comet through the void, the life cycle of a silicon-based lifeform on a world a million light-years away, the last thoughts of a dying god at the end of time. He felt the life force of every single person in the USJ, of every blade of grass outside, of every citizen in the city, of every creature in the ocean. It was a torrent of sensory input that threatened to tear his consciousness apart. And then, there was the Noma, Terminus, the pinnacle of AFO's bioengineering, the all-might killer, registered the cosmic entity as a threat. Its programming, its very reason for being, took over. It ignored the fallen all-might, and charged toward the blazing pillar of light that now contained Izuku. It swung all 4 of its arms, pouring every jewel of siphoned power into one cataclysmic, world-breaking strike. The attack never landed. Before its fists could make contact, the Phoenix, now merged with Izuku, merely looked at it. Izuku, floating unconsciously within the fiery avatar, raised a hand on instinct. Terminus did not explode. It did not burn. It simply ceased to be. One moment, it was a 4-armed engine of destruction. The next, it was a cloud of fading motes of light, its atoms disassembled and scattered across the quantum foam. It was unwritten from the book of existence, its story erased. The raw power it held was simply reabsorbed into the universe, a drop of water returning to an infinite ocean. The silence that followed was more profound, more deafening, than any explosion. Tamura Shigaraki stared at the empty space where his ultimate weapon had been. His hands fell limp at his sides. The itching stopped. His mind, which operated on the simple, brutal logic of a video game, could not process what had just happened. There were no health bars, no special moves, no cheat codes that could account for this. This was not a player character beating a boss. This was the game developer deleting the file. "Kurogyri," he whispered, his voice trembling for the first time. What was that? What is that? "I do not know," the mist villain replied, his yellow eyes wide with a terror that seemed alien on his ethereal form. "But it is not of this world. Its power is not a quirk. It is a law of nature. We cannot fight a law of nature. We must leave. Now." For once, Shigaraki didn't argue. His nihilism was predicated on the idea that the world was an unfair, broken game that he could break even further. But this was a power that could rewrite the rules of the game itself. He felt a fear so deep and primal it bypassed his destructive urges entirely. It was the fear of utter, absolute irrelevance. With a swirl of purple-black mist, the villains vanished. The grunts they had brought with them were left behind, most of them unconscious or catatonic from the psychic backlash of the Phoenix's arrival. The dome of the USJ began to change. The fake sky, the projection on the ceiling, flickered and died. But it was not replaced by the simple concrete of the roof. The entire vaulted ceiling transformed into a swirling, breathtaking nebula. Hues of deep indigo, vibrant magenta, and stellar gold churned in silent, cosmic majesty. New constellations glittered into existence, casting a soft, ethereal glow on the stunned students below. In the center of it all, where the Nomu had been erased, Izuku Midoriya floated. The colossal firebird was gone, but its power remained, clinging to him like a second skin. He was wreathed in a gentle, flickering corona of golden red fire that cast no heat. His hero costume was pristine, the tattered green fabric repaired and seemingly infused with the same stellar light. His hair, usually an untamable dark green mess, floated around his head as if he were underwater, tipped with embers of cosmic energy. He slowly opened his eyes. They were no longer his warm, expressive emerald green. They were pools of liquid gold, burning with the light of 1,000 suns. They held an ancient, impossible knowledge. When he looked at his classmates, he didn't just see them. He saw the intricate dance of their DNA, he heard the faint electrical hum of their nervous systems, he felt the rhythm of their terrified heartbeats, as if they were his own. Katsuki Bakugo stared up at him, his mouth agape. The insults, the rage, the burning ambition to be number one, all of it felt like children's toys in the face of this reality-shattering spectacle. He had always seen Deku as a pebble in his path, an obstacle to be overcome. But this was not Deku. This was a god wearing his childhood friend's face. The sheer scale of the power on display made his own quirk, his entire reason for being, feel like a parlor trick. For the first time in his life, Katsuki Bakugo felt truly, utterly, hopelessly weak. Deku-kun? Achiko Uraraka whispered, her voice barely audible. The sight was terrifyingly beautiful. The boy who got flustered talking to her, the heroic spirit who had saved her during the entrance exam, was now floating in the sky, wearing the cosmos as a cloak. Izuku's gaze swept over them, uncomprehending. The torrent of information was too much. The voices of past Phoenix hosts mingled with the thoughts of his friends, the hum of the Earth's magnetic field, and the faint, lonely song of a satellite in orbit. His human mind, his 15-year-old brain, was being stretched across an infinite, cosmic canvas. Fire, and life, forever. The power of creation is yours, temper it. So much life, so fragile, protect it. He saw the lines of causality, the threads of fate, branching out from this single moment. He saw futures where he burned worlds to ash and futures where he seeded dead planets with new life. It was a weight no mortal was ever meant to bear. His brow furrowed. The celestial glow in his eyes flickered. A single, pained sound escaped his lips, a soft whimper of a boy completely and utterly lost. Too much. The corona of fire around him collapsed inward, vanishing into his skin. The nebula on the ceiling of the USJ faded back to dull, gray concrete. The unearthly light died, plunging the plaza back into the grim, artificial twilight of the facility's emergency lighting. And Izuku Midoriya, the boy who had just touched divinity, fell. He tumbled out of the air, his body limp, his consciousness finally succumbing to the overwhelming sensory overload. He was just a boy in a green costume again, falling towards the broken earth. Young Midoriya, a blur of motion. All Might, ignoring his own catastrophic injuries, ignoring the blood pouring from his mouth, surged forward. He pushed off with his one good leg, channeling the last dregs of his power not for a fight, but for a final act of protection. He caught his successor in his arms just before he hit the ground, stumbling and collapsing to his knees under the weight, holding the boy tight against his chest. The remaining students of Class 1A could only stare, their minds struggling to reconcile the impossible, terrifying, and magnificent thing they had just witnessed. The immediate danger was over. The villains were gone. But as All Might cradled the unconscious form of his student, a new, far more profound and frightening question hung in the blood-scented air. The problem of the League of Villains had just been replaced by the enigma of Izuku Midoriya. What in the world had he become? The first sensation was not one of sight or sound, but of a deep, resonant hum. It was a chord played on the strings of reality, a constant, basso profundo vibration that seemed to emanate not from the world around him, but from the marrow of his own bones. It was the background radiation of existence, the silent spin of the planet, the whisper of stellar winds from a million light-years away. And for the first time, Izuku Midoriya could hear it all. He was adrift in a sea of awareness. Before his eyelids even flickered, he knew he was not alone. There were two life forces in the room with him. One was a steady, warm candle flame of focused energy and mild exasperation, Recovery Girl. The other was a larger, more complex presence, a once raging bonfire now banked to a bed of dwindling, precious embers, radiating a profound mixture of concern, hope, and bone-deep weariness. All Might. He could feel the intricate web of their circulatory systems, the faint electrical sparks of their neural pathways, the very rhythm of their souls. With a shuddering gasp, Izuku's eyes snapped open. The ceiling was a clean, sterile white. The air smelled of antiseptic and fresh linen. The rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor was a familiar, almost comforting sound in the overwhelming symphony of new sensations. He was in the UA infirmary. He tried to sit up, and his body responded with an effortless fluidity that was utterly alien to him. There was no pain. No lingering ache. No phantom twinge from bones that had been shattered into splinters just— how long ago was it? Easy there, dearie, a voice chided gently. Chio Shizenji, Recovery Girl, bustled over to his bedside. Her usual brisk, no-nonsense demeanor was frayed at the edges, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated bafflement. She held a tablet, her brow furrowed as she scanned the readings. Don't go trying to run a marathon just yet. Though, judging by these numbers, you probably could. Izuku looked down at himself. His left arm, the one he had vividly remembered being twisted into a mangled ruin, was perfectly fine. He flexed his fingers, watching the tendons move under pale, unscarred skin. He pushed himself up into a sitting position. His ribs didn't protest. They felt stronger than ever, his entire torso a solid, reinforced cage. My injuries. He mumbled, his voice hoarse. How? That, Midoriya, she said, tapping the tablet with more force than necessary, is the billion-yen question. When they brought you in, you were a mess. Multiple compound fractures, severe internal hemorrhaging, third-degree burns from whatever that light was. Your quirk had torn you apart again, but worse than ever. By all rights, even with my healing, you should have been in a cast for 6 months, if you survived at all. She paused, taking off her glasses to rub the bridge of her nose. I gave you a kiss to start the healing process, but it was like trying to patch a dam with a band-aid. Then, about an hour after you arrived, something happened. Your body's natural regenerative abilities went into overdrive. I'm not talking about accelerated healing. I'm talking about a complete, top-to-bottom cellular reconstruction. Your bones didn't just mend, they reformed with a denser, almost crystalline lattice structure. Your muscle fibers rewove themselves at 3 times their previous tensile strength. It was impossible. It defies all known biology, quirk-related or otherwise. All Might, in his skeletal form, stepped forward from the corner of the room where he'd been watching, a silent, gaunt sentinel. His face was etched with a worry so deep it seemed to have carved new lines into his features. Young Midoriya. How do you feel? Izuku opened his mouth to say fine, the automatic, polite response. But it wasn't true. Fine was a drop of water trying to describe an ocean. I feel everything, he whispered, and the confession seemed to open a floodgate in his mind. The hum intensified. He could suddenly feel the life forces of his classmates, resting and recovering in other parts of the school. He felt Kirishima's sturdy, resilient energy, Bakugo's explosive, crackling spirit, Uraraka's warm, bright aura like a gentle gravitational pull. He could feel the hundreds of other students, the faculty, the quiet, formidable intelligence of Principal Nizu in his office, a complex and intricate knot of thought. It expanded further. He felt the thrum of Mustafu, the millions of lives moving through the city streets like blood through arteries. He felt the rustle of leaves in the forests beyond the city limits, the slow, ancient life of the trees. He felt the tectonic plates grinding miles beneath his feet, a slow, geological sigh. And beyond that, the pull of the moon, the warmth of the sun on the far side of the planet, the silent, majestic spin of the earth itself as it hurtled through the void. It was a deep, bass thrum that resonated in his soul, a constant reminder of his own dizzying insignificance and his new, terrifying connection to it all. He clutched his head, a low groan escaping his lips. The beeping of the heart monitor sped up, becoming an insistent, panicked rhythm. The world was too loud, too bright, too much. Every sensation was magnified 1,000-fold. The white of the ceiling was an aggressive, blinding glare. The scent of antiseptic was a chemical assault on his nostrils. All Might's worried breathing was a cannonade in his ears. Young Midoriya! What is it? What's wrong? All Might rushed to his side, placing a bony hand on his shoulder. The touch was like a lightning strike. In a dizzying flash, Izuku felt the history of One for All, the hopes, the fears, the triumphs and sacrifices of the 8 souls who had carried it. He felt Nana Shimura's fierce love and bitter regret. He felt Haikyuu Shinomori's lonely vigil. He felt the burning, righteous fury of the second and third users. And beneath it all, he felt Toshinori Yagi's own spirit, the desperate, burning desire to be a pillar for the world, and the creeping, cold dread of his own fading light. It was too intimate, too raw. Izuku recoiled, scrambling back on the bed until his back hit the wall. Don't. It's too. I can feel. He couldn't articulate it. How could he explain that he could feel his mentor's soul? His vitals are going haywire. Recovery Girl exclaimed, her medical instincts overriding her confusion. His body is emitting a low-level energy I can't classify. It's almost like a form of Cherenkov radiation, but organic. What in the world happened in that dome? Overwhelmed, Izuku's consciousness fled the world of sterile white rooms and frantic beeping. He squeezed his eyes shut and retreated inward, seeking the familiar inner sanctum of One for All, the dark, quiet space where he could convene with the vestiges. But that space was gone. He did not find himself in the familiar void, surrounded by the silent, shadowy figures of his predecessors. Instead, he was floating in the heart of a living galaxy. A swirling nebula of gold and crimson, the color of passion and creation, enveloped him. Distant suns pulsed in time with his heartbeat, and the vestiges of the previous OFA users were there. But they were no longer shadows. They were faint, star-like constellations, their forms traced in pale blue light, looking on with a mixture of terror and absolute awe. They were silent, their usual counsel and presence dwarfed by the sheer majesty of their new environment. This is One for All? He thought, the thought echoing in the cosmic silence. One for All is the vessel, a new voice answered, a voice like the chiming of crystal bells and the roar of a supernova. We are the passenger. His head whipped around, and he saw flashes of imagery, not memories, but echoes of experience, burned into the fabric of this new mindscape. He saw a blue-green planet torn apart by a hungry, world-devouring entity. He saw a man in a wheelchair with a mind that could shatter mountains. He saw a red-haired woman, her eyes burning with a fire identical to the one now swirling around him, weeping as she held a dying universe in her hands. And then, he felt a presence. It wasn't a person, not truly. It was a psychic echo, a remnant of a soul left behind like a fingerprint on the soul of the universe. The echo took a form he could comprehend, the red-haired woman from his vision, dressed in a green and gold uniform. She was translucent, made of the same starlight as the nebula around them, but her expression was one of immense, ancient compassion. She didn't speak with her mouth. Her thoughts simply became his. Breathe. The command was gentle, but carried the authority of a fundamental law of physics. Izuku, in the real world, took a deep, shuddering breath. The frantic beeping of the monitor began to slow. You are a radio that has suddenly been tuned to the frequency of the cosmos, the echo explained, its presence a calming balm on his frayed nerves. You are trying to listen to every station at once. You must learn to focus. Listen to the song, not the noise. Back in the infirmary, Izuku focused, following the disembodied instruction. He let the overwhelming roar of the city, the planet, the cosmos, fade into the background. He focused on the hum in his own chest, the new, infinite power source that had intertwined itself with One for All. He focused on the two life forces in the room with him, separating them from the billions of others, seeing them as clear, distinct notes in the universal symphony. His breathing evened out. The world slowly came back into focus, the sensory overload receding to a manageable, if still intense, hum. He opened his eyes. All Might and Recovery Girl were staring at him, their faces a mask of relief and renewed confusion. I'm okay, Izuku said, his voice steadier now. I think I'm okay. Deep within his soul, the red-haired woman's echo gave him a sad, gentle smile. The first contact was over, but a single, cryptic phrase lingered in his mind, a promise and a warning. We are fire. We are life. We are one. Later that day, in the meticulously organized and heavily fortified office of Principal Nizu, the mood was somber. The principal, a chimera of indeterminate species, sat behind his large desk, paws steepled, his intelligent black eyes betraying none of the turmoil that must have been churning behind them. Across from him sat a bandaged and weary Shota Aizawa and a deeply troubled Tashinori Yagi. On the large monitor behind Nizu's desk, security footage from the USJ played on a silent loop. It showed the arrival of the fiery raptor, the instantaneous erasure of the Heian Nomu, and the terrifying, godlike transformation of Izuku Midoriya. They had watched it a dozen times, and it became no less unbelievable with each viewing. The official story, Nizu began, his voice calm and measured, is that All Might, with assistance from the students, successfully repelled an unprecedented villain attack. A gas main in the facility ruptured during the fight, causing a significant but contained explosion that dispatched the most formidable of the villain's bioweapons. The Celestial Light Show has been attributed to the quirk of a previously unknown villain who fled the scene. It is a flimsy narrative, but it is the one we will maintain for now. Aizawa shifted in his chair, wincing as the movement pulled at his injuries. Flimsy doesn't begin to cover it, sir. My students saw it. They saw Midoriya become that. They won't stay quiet forever. They will if we ask them to, Nizu stated, his gaze unwavering. We will frame it as a matter of national security, which is precisely what it is. For their own safety, and for Midoriya's, they must be made to understand the gravity of the secret they now hold. He turned his gaze to Tashinori. All Might. You are his mentor. You gave him one for all. What do you know of this? Tashinori sagged in his chair, the weight of the world seemingly pressing down on his frail shoulders. Nothing, he admitted, the word tasting like failure. I can still feel one for all within him. The embers are there. But they are dwarfed. It's like standing in a closet with a candle, and then someone replaces one of the walls with the sun. This power, it's not a quirk. I felt it the moment it arrived. It felt ancient, primal. It felt like the universe itself had bent its knee. Nizu nodded slowly, turning to look back at the frozen image of Izuku wreathed in cosmic fire. I have spent the last 72 hours consulting every database I have access to, including some that officially do not exist. I have cross-referenced reports of inexplicable cosmic phenomena, mythological texts, and theoretical quark singularity papers. There is no precedent for this. He took a sip of his tea, the picture of calm contemplation. What we witnessed was not a quark activation. It was an arrival. A cosmic-level entity, for reasons we cannot begin to fathom, has chosen your successor, Izuku Midoriya, as its host. We are no longer dealing with a promising hero in training, gentlemen. We are dealing with a boy who has a fundamental force of nature living in his soul. The principal's words hung in the air, heavy and cold. He minimized the footage and brought up a complex chart of global power structures, hero organizations, national governments, clandestine agencies. The power to erase matter from existence, to heal mortal wounds in an instant, to warp the very environment. If word of this gets out, Midoriya will not be seen as a hero. He will be seen as a god, a demon, or a weapon. Nations would go to war to control him. Villains like All for One would become obsessed with possessing him. Scientists would want to dissect him. He would become the single most destabilizing element in modern human history. Aizawa's visible eye widened. So what do? We can't just pretend this didn't happen. He can't control it. I saw his face. He was as terrified as we were. Precisely, Nizu said, a grim sort of excitement entering his voice. Our course of action is clear, if perilous. First, absolute secrecy. A new security protocol is now in effect, codenamed Empyrean. All information regarding Midoriya's new state is classified above all other UA matters. Second, we do not treat him as a threat. We treat him as our student. We must provide him with a stable, supportive environment. That boy's compassionate heart is very likely the only thing keeping that cosmic power from misbehaving. He looked directly at All Might, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. And that is where you come in, Toshinori. Your role has never been more critical. You must be his anchor. You must remind him of his humanity, of the boy he was, of the hero he wants to be. His power may be cosmic, but his spirit is what matters. It is the only thing that can hope to steer the storm. The gravity of his new responsibility settled on All Might, a burden far heavier than being the symbol of peace had ever been. He had been tasked with teaching a boy how to be a hero. Now, he was being asked to teach a god how to be human. I understand, Toshinori said, his voice quiet but firm. I will not let him lose himself. I will not fail him. Niza gave a slight nod. Good. Because failure, in this case, might not just mean the end of a young man's life. It could very well mean the end of everything. Back in the infirmary, hours after All Might and Recovery Girl had left him to rest, Izuku sat alone in the encroaching twilight. The room was quiet, but the universe was not. The hum was still there, a constant companion at the edge of his hearing. He was slowly learning to filter it, to turn down the volume on the cosmos. He held up his right hand, the one that had so often been a testament to his own reckless self-destruction. He focused, not on the memory of breaking it, but on the new, infinite well of power within him. He tried to summon one for all, to call forth the familiar green lightning and the comforting warmth of his predecessors. He reached for it, and for a moment, he felt the crackle of familiar energy. But it was immediately subsumed by something else. A faint golden warmth spread from his chest down his arm. The air in front of his palm shimmered. Slowly, a single mote of light bloomed into existence, no bigger than a marble. It wasn't lightning. It was a miniature star. It pulsed with a soft, golden-white light, casting intricate shadows on the walls. It radiated a gentle warmth, and Izuku could feel its incredible, condensed power. It was beautiful, serene, and utterly terrifying. Within that tiny sphere was the power to create, to destroy, to heal. It was the Phoenix Force, in a form he could hold in his hand. He could feel the OFA vestiges watching from their stellar thrones within his soul. There all was a tangible pressure at the back of his mind. My God! He heard Nana Shimura's voice, a faint, reverent whisper across the psychic void. The child has become a star-bearer. He closed his hand, and the tiny star vanished without a sound. He was still Izuku Midoriya. He was still in his first year at UA. He still had friends to protect and a world that needed saving. His dream hadn't vanished. It had been magnified to an impossible, terrifying scale. He was scared. He was more scared than he had been when facing Terminus, more scared than he had been his entire life. He was a boy who had been given the power of a deity, a boy who could feel the turning of galaxies in his blood. But as he looked out the window at the rising moon, a single, unwavering thought cut through the fear and the cosmic noise. A thought that was the very core of his being, the beacon that had called the Phoenix to him in the first place. I have to control this. I have to learn. I will use this power to save everyone. The question was no longer whether he had enough power. The question was whether he could wield it without being consumed, and without breaking the world in the process. His Hero Academia was just beginning, but the curriculum had changed. He was no longer just learning to be a hero. He was learning to be a god. The air in Training Ground Gamma was still and heavy with anticipation. The sprawling industrial complex, a labyrinth of pipes, catwalks, and towering concrete structures courtesy of Cementas's quirk, was usually a cacophony of student activity. Today, it was eerily silent, the entire facility cordoned off for a single, unprecedented purpose, to try and measure the infinite. Izuku Midoriya stood in the center of a wide, reinforced plaza, feeling impossibly small. He wore a modified version of his gym uniform, interwoven with sensors and monitoring equipment that made him feel more like a lab specimen than a hero in training. 50 yards away, All Might and Aizawa watched from behind a transparent, multi-layered blast shield that Niza had assured them was rated to withstand a tactical nuclear strike. Izuku wasn't sure if that was comforting or terrifying. All right, young Midoriya. All Might's voice crackled through the small earpiece he wore. It was strained, the usual booming confidence replaced by a taut, nervous energy. The goal here is simple. Diagnostics. We need a baseline. We need to know what you're working with. Just try to call on one for all. Nothing more. Aim for a simple 5%. A simple 5%. It used to be his Everest, a peak of power he had struggled for months to reach without shattering his own limbs. Now, the request felt like being asked to take a single drop of water from the middle of the Pacific Ocean. One for all was still there, he could feel it, a familiar warmth in the core of his being, but it was no longer a distinct river of energy. It was a single current caught in a cosmic ocean, a roaring, stellar furnace that hummed with the power of creation itself. I'll try, Izuku replied, his voice barely a whisper. He took a deep breath, the sterile, recycled air of the training ground doing little to calm the frantic thrumming in his chest. That thrum wasn't just nerves, it was the power itself, a constant, low-level vibration that resonated with the very fabric of his cells. Aizawa's dry, skeptical voice cut in. Midoriya. If at any point you feel it slipping, even an inch, you stop. Immediately. We're not here to see a light show, we're here to see if the boy is still in control of the lightning, or if the lightning is in control of the boy. The lightning is the least of my worries, Izuku thought grimly. He closed his eyes, shutting out the sight of the gray, oppressive concrete and turning his focus inward. He bypassed the overwhelming sense of the cosmos, the spin of the planet, the distant fusion of stars, and reached for that familiar, sacred power. One for all. 5%. Just a flicker. He pictured it in his mind, the crackling green energy, the red veins of power spreading across his skin, the contained, controlled burst of strength. He focused on his right fist, clenching it at his side. He pulled on the power, gently, like coaxing a timid animal from its den. For a glorious, fleeting second it worked. He felt the familiar surge, the comfortable warmth of the vestiges. A faint, emerald aura flickered around his hand. The red lines began to trace their way up his arm, and then the ocean answered the call of the river. The faint green glow was instantly and violently consumed by a tidal wave of incandescent gold. It wasn't a flare-up, it was a detonation of pure, solar energy. It surged from his core, down his arm, and into his fist not as a request, but as a command. The power wasn't destructive or hateful, it was just, absolute. It was the universe deciding that this single point in space needed to be much, much hotter. Izuku's eyes flew open, wide with panic. It's too much. I can't. He didn't even get to throw a punch. He didn't get to aim. The power simply erupted. It wasn't an explosion of force, but a pure energy. A torrent of golden red flames, looking less like fire and more like a liquid star, poured from his clenched fist. It shot forward in a cohesive beam, striking the 50-foot-tall concrete tower he had been instructed to target. There was no deafening boom of impact. There was only a sharp, high-pitched hiss, like a mountain of ice being dropped into the sun. The concrete tower didn't shatter or crumble. It melted. Instantly. The 50-foot structure slumped, its solid form dissolving under the celestial heat. The concrete glowed white-hot, then translucent, the aggregate and cement liquefying into a river of molten slag. But it didn't stop there. The intense, focused energy was so pure, so absolute, that it initiated a molecular transformation. The molten river cooled almost as fast as it had formed, solidifying not back into concrete, but into a smooth, swirling monolith of obsidian black glass. The beam of light from Izuku's hand ceased as quickly as it had begun, the power receding back into him with a suddenness that left him dizzy. He stared, panting, at his hand. It was fine, not a burn, not a scratch. He then looked up at his handiwork. Where a brutalist concrete tower had stood moments before, there was now a 50-foot monument of polished, unnatural glass, shimmering under the facility's lights. The ground around its base was a fused, crystalline crater. Behind the blast shield, Aizawa and All Might were frozen in stunned silence. The sensors are fried, Aizawa finally managed to say, his voice flat with disbelief. He tapped a dead monitor. Heat readings went off the scale. Energy output there's no metric for it. It didn't register as kinetic, thermal, or any known quirk energy type. It registered as environmental shift. All Might stared at the glass tower, his skeletal form trembling slightly. He didn't even punch it, he whispered. He just pointed. Izuku stumbled back, collapsing to his knees. The sheer, effortless scale of the power was a terrifying, physical weight. He hadn't wanted to do that. He had tried to be careful, to be precise. But the power had its own will, its own inertia. It was an apex predator, and his conscious thought was merely a suggestion it could choose to ignore. He was losing himself. The fear was a cold, sharp spike in his gut. What if next time he was trying to save someone and accidentally unmade a city block? What if he lost his temper and burned the sky? No, he needed answers. Not from his teachers, who were just as lost as he was. He needed answers from the source. He closed his eyes again, sinking past the fear, past the confusion, and plunged headfirst into the swirling nebula of his own soul. The transition was instantaneous. The great training ground vanished, replaced by the breathtaking, impossible vista of his inner world. He floated in a sea of living starlight, crimson and gold clouds of psychic energy drifting around him like cosmic weather fronts. The constellations of the One for All vestiges burned with their steady, pale blue light in the distance, silent and watchful. Hello? He thought, his mental voice a ripple in the profound silence. Is anyone there? The voice from before. I need your help. Please. A warmth bloomed in front of him, coalescing from the stardust. The ethereal, translucent form of the red-haired woman appeared, her green eyes filled with an ancient, sorrowful wisdom. It was the psychic echo of Jean Grey, a guide left behind in the currents of the Phoenix Force. I am here, child. Her thoughts flowed into his, a calming wave against the shore of his panic. I know you are frightened. To feel the engine of creation thrumming in a mortal heart is a terrifying burden. What is this? Izuku pleaded, gesturing to the cosmic panorama around them. What is happening to me? I tried to use One for All, but this fire, it just took over. I can't control it. You cannot control it in the way you control a quirk, Jean explained, her form drifting closer. You do not control a hurricane. You do not command the tide. The Phoenix Force is not a tool in your toolbox, Izuku Midoriya. It is the hand that built the toolbox, the fire in which the tools were forged. It is a fundamental, sentient consciousness of life and psionic energy. It is, for all intents and purposes, the universe's immune system. Izuku struggled to comprehend the scale of her words. The universe's immune system? A quirk, that's not a quirk, precisely, she confirmed. It is not a genetic anomaly. It is a nexus. A confluence. It is the alpha and the omega of all life. It burns away that which is stagnant, that which is a cancer to reality, and from the ashes, it seeds new life, new potential. It is the cycle of death and rebirth given will and form. The flashes of imagery returned to him, clearer this time. A world teeming with life being consumed by a silver-clad giant, and the phoenix descending like a vengeful angel to burn the cancer away. A timeline collapsing into a crystalline singularity, and the phoenix acting as a surgeon, mending the wound in reality. But why? Izuku asked, his voice trembling. Why me? I'm nobody. I was quirkless. I'm not strong enough for this. Jean's ethereal face softened with a profound empathy that resonated deep in Izuku's soul. It is not your strength that called to it, child. It is your heart. Across the infinite realities, the phoenix has had many hosts. Warriors, scholars, kings, gods. Often, it is drawn to great power, to those who can withstand its energies. But such hosts are often corrupted. Their ambition, their rage, their grief, these emotions become a poison. They can twist the phoenix's purpose from rebirth to pure, nihilistic destruction. This is the shadow of the phoenix, the dark phoenix. It is the entity's purest, most uncontrollable rage, and it has consumed galaxies. She raised a translucent hand, and an image formed in the nebula between them, a fiery, demonic raptor of immense size, its eyes burning with black fire as it devoured a sun. The image was so terrifying, so filled with cosmic agony, that Izuku flinched back. The Force felt that potential for darkness growing in your world. A man who steals the spirits of others, a society built on the fragile hierarchy of power. It sought an anchor, a host who could wield its power without succumbing to its darkness. And then it heard your call from that broken place, a soul crying out, not for power to dominate, not for vengeance, but with a pure, selfless, absolute will to protect others, even at the cost of your own life. That compassion, it was a beacon of pure light in the darkness. It is the ultimate antidote to the dark phoenix's poison. It chose you because you are, in your very essence, a creator and a protector, not a destroyer. The weight of her words settled on him. He wasn't just a host. He was a cage. A failsafe. His own goodness was the only thing standing between his universe and a galaxy-ending tantrum. And one for all? Izuku asked, looking over at the distant, silent vestiges. Where does it fit in all of this? Ah, the torch you carry, Jean said, a note of fascination in her thoughts. That is the true miracle of this union. The Phoenix Force is infinite. Pouring it into a mortal shell is like trying to pour the ocean into a teacup. It should have vaporized your body and scattered your consciousness across 1,000 realities. But it did not. One for all, it is a unique power. A stockpiler of not just energy, but of will. Of spirit. She turned her gaze towards the constellations of the past users. It has a structure. A lineage. A fundamental purpose. It is acting as a humanizing anchor for the Phoenix. It provides a conceptual framework, a human-shaped vessel for an ocean of power to inhabit without shattering the container. It is the lightning rod that grounds the cosmic storm. So, they're working together? They are forming a symbiosis, Jean corrected. One for all gives the Phoenix a stable, compassionate host and a framework through which to interact with your reality on a scale less than apocalyptic. In return, the Phoenix is supercharging one for all to an unimaginable degree. More than that, as the ultimate force of life, it is constantly regenerating your body. It has perceived the damage one for all inflicts upon you as a flaw, an illness to be cured. It is reinforcing your very being. You will never again break your bones by using your power, Izuku Midoriya. The fire will not allow its temple to crumble. A profound sense of relief washed over Izuku, so potent it almost brought him to his knees. The constant fear of self-destruction, the price he had always paid for his power, was gone. As if sensing they were the subject of discussion, the constellations of the vestiges drifted closer. They were still faint, still odd, but their presence was more distinct now. A woman's form, traced in stars, with wild, flowing hair, floated to the forefront. Nana Shimura. So this fire, it's protecting him? Her voice was a whisper of starlight, filled with a grandmotherly concern that transcended death itself. It has bonded with him, Jean's echo replied. His life is its life. It will protect its host as a body protects its own heart. A taller, sterner constellation of a man with a severe expression, the second user, drifted forward. And the price? All power has a price. What does this entity want? It wants what it has always wanted, Jean answered simply. Balance. It wants life to flourish. It has chosen Izuku as its avatar to protect the balance in this corner of reality. Its desires now align with his own, to save, to protect, to inspire. Finally, a smaller, fainter constellation, the very first one, moved to the center. Yoichi Shigaraki, the first bearer of One for All. His presence was gentle, but held an immense, foundational strength. His voice was not a command or a question, but a quiet, profound realization. My brother's quirk was the power to take. He built his empire by stealing from others. In defiance, I was given a quirk that could only be given away. One for all was never meant to be a power for oneself. It was created to be a power for others. A gift passed from one to the next, to stand against the darkness. He turned his starry gaze towards the glowing nebula that represented the Phoenix's presence. This entity, the ultimate life-giving force, a power of rebirth and protection. It is not a corruption of our purpose. It is the ultimate expression of it. The other vestiges seemed to contemplate this, their terror slowly giving way to a profound, humbling acceptance. They had been the stewards of a sacred flame. Now, that flame had been used to light a sun. Their mission had not been hijacked. It had been elevated to a cosmic scale. Izuku felt the pieces click into place. he wasn't wielding two powers. He was wielding one, a new, transcendent entity born of the fusion of human will and cosmic fire. He wasn't Deku with the Phoenix Force. He was something new. You must learn to guide it, not command it. Jean's voice brought him back to the present. When you tried to use 5%, you were speaking the language of force, of limits. The Phoenix does not understand limits. It understands intent. Do not think, I will hit this with 5% of my power. Think, I need to disable this opponent without harming them. Think, I need to create a barrier to protect these people. Your will is now the focusing lens for a star. The purer and more precise your intent, the more control you will have. It is a battle you must fight not in your muscles, but in your soul. Her form began to fade, her starlight dissolving back into the swirling nebula. This is your journey now, Izuku Midoriya. The vestiges and I can offer guidance, but you are the one who walks the path. Be the hero you have always been. Your heart is your greatest shield and your sharpest weapon. Do not let it falter. With that, her presence was gone, leaving him alone with the silent, watchful vestiges and the thrumming, living heart of the cosmos. He took a deep, mental breath and let the mindscape fade. His eyes opened. He was still on his knees in the training ground. Only a few seconds had passed in the real world. All Might was halfway to him, his face a mask of frantic worry, while Aizawa was barking into a comms unit, likely to Niza. Young Midoriya. Are you alright? Answer me. All Might skidded to a halt in front of him. Izuku looked up, his eyes clear and focused. The fear was still there, a cold stone in his stomach, but it was no longer a paralyzing terror. It was a healthy, respectful fear, the kind a sailor has for the sea. He had answers now. He had a path, however terrifying and narrow it might be. I'm okay, All Might, he said, his voice steady. He pushed himself to his feet, his body feeling lighter and stronger than ever before. I understand now. He looked at the towering, impossible glass monolith he had created. It was a monument to his lack of control, a testament to his fear. But it was also proof of his potential. It's not a quirk, he said, more to himself than to his teachers. It's a part of me. And I have to learn its language. He clenched his fist again, but this time, he didn't reach for a percentage. He didn't think about power levels or output. He closed his eyes and focused on a single, simple, pure intent. Warmth. He opened his hand. In his palm, a gentle, golden light bloomed, no bigger than a softball. It radiated a soft, comforting heat, like a miniature fireplace. There was no explosion, no catastrophic melting. It was contained, controlled, and perfectly aligned with his will. All Might and Aizawa stared, speechless. Izuku looked at the gentle flame in his hand, and for the first time since the USJ, a small, determined smile touched his lips. The journey ahead was monumental, the stakes were higher than he could possibly imagine, but he was not walking it blind. He was Izuku Midoriya, the 9th user of One for All, and the host of the Phoenix Force, and his real training had just begun. Deep beneath the churning, steel-gray waters of Tokyo Bay, nestled in the bedrock of the earth itself, lay Tartarus. It was a place spoken of only in hushed whispers, a modern-day oubliette designed to contain the uncontainable. It was less a prison and more a tomb for the living, a place where monsters were sent to be forgotten, and in its deepest, most secure, most isolated cell, a man who was more myth than monster was contemplating the nature of infinity. All for one did not measure time in days or hours. Such mortal conceits were beneath him. He measured it in heartbeats, in the slow, rhythmic pulse of the life support systems that kept his ruined body functioning. He measured it in the subtle shifts of pressure in the kilometers of rock and water above him, and in the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the quark-suppressing technology that saturated the very air he breathed. For years, this had been the entirety of his sensory input, a monotonous, predictable universe he had grown to despise, until the incident at the USJ. When it had happened, he had been deep in a meditative state, his consciousness roaming the vast, internal library of stolen quirks that constituted his very being. Suddenly, a shockwave had ripped through him. It was not physical. It was not psychic in any way he recognized. It was a tremor on a level of reality he had only theorized existed. It was as if the universe itself had rung like a bell, a single, resonant chord that had momentarily deafened the symphony of quirks within him. Every quirk he possessed, from the most mundane stockpiling ability to the most reality-defying warping power, had recoiled. They had shrunk back like frightened animals before a predator of unimaginable scale. For a single, terrifying moment, All for One had felt utterly, completely powerless, a feeling he hadn't experienced since his first, crippling encounter with All Might. But this was different. This wasn't the brute, righteous force of One for All. This was something else. Something fundamental. He had immediately reached out through the few, subtle channels of influence he still possessed. A guard whose child's medical bills he had anonymously paid. A low-level data analyst in the Hero Network with a gambling problem. Whispers and fragments of data had trickled back to him over the ensuing days, forming a mosaic of impossible events. The League's attack, the new, advanced Noma, and the miracle at the USJ. The official reports were a laughable work of fiction, a gas main explosion, a villain with a light-based quirk. All for One had scoffed at the pathetic attempt at misdirection. He had seen the filtered satellite imagery, the energy readings that had made government censors scream and then die. He had listened to the terrified, incoherent ramblings of the low-level villains who had been captured, their minds shattered by what they had witnessed. They spoke of a Firebird made of stars, of the Noma being erased, of a UE student floating in a sky filled with galaxies. And every single report, every whisper, every piece of fragmented data, pointed to one name, Izuku Midoriya. The ninth inheritor of One for All. All for One sat motionless in the darkness of his cell, the only light the faint, rhythmic glow from the medical monitors embedded in his featureless mask. This wasn't a setback. This wasn't a complication. This was a revelation. For centuries, he had played a game of collection. Quirks were his playing cards, society his game board. He had sought to gather every power, to become the ultimate being, to hold all the cards in the deck. His obsession with taking one for all from his foolish brother's successors had been the central focus of his game, the one legendary card that had always eluded him. But this new power, it was not a card. It was the game itself. It was the hand that shuffled the deck, the table upon which the board rested. The power to unmake his greatest creation with a single glance was not a quirk. It was something more. It was the power he had always dreamed of, a power he hadn't even known it was possible to dream of. It was the final power. The ultimate quirk. The God quirk. His obsession with One for All, with crushing All Might's legacy, evaporated like dew in the face of a supernova. That was a squabble between mortals. This was a cosmic prize. His single, all-consuming purpose shifted. Tamura Shigaraki and his childish games of destruction were now irrelevant. Breaking out of Tartarus was no longer his primary goal, but merely the first, simple step in a far grander plan. He had to have it. He would not try to steal it as he had stolen other quirks. He sensed, instinctively, that this power could not be taken. It had to be claimed. He would capture the boy, break his spirit, and study the energy that flowed through him. He would find the source, the trigger, and make himself a more worthy vessel. He would prove to this cosmic entity that a compassionate, bleeding heart child was a flawed and temporary host. A being of his intellect, his ambition, his centuries of experience, he was the proper vessel for divinity. A slow, rasping sound, the first he had made in days, echoed in the confined space. It was the dry, chilling sound of All for One laughing. The game had just become infinitely more interesting. The atmosphere in Class 1A was thick with an unspoken tension that no amount of present mixed boisterous teaching or midnight's flamboyant lessons could dispel. The 20 students who had survived the USJ incident were bound by a shared secret, a collective trauma that set them apart from the rest of the school. They had all been debriefed by Principal Nizu and Aizawa, sworn to absolute secrecy under the guise of national security. They were told the official story was a lie, and that for Midoriya's safety, they were to act as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. It was an impossible request. How were they supposed to act normal around a boy who they had seen wear a cloak of stars? How could they go back to sparring exercises and classroom rivalries after witnessing one of their own erase a monster from existence? Izuku Midoriya had become an enigma. He was quiet, more so than usual. He would sit in class, diligently taking notes, but his eyes often held a distant, far-off look, as if he were listening to a conversation happening light years away. Sometimes, in the middle of a lecture, his head would snap up, his gaze fixing on a point in the sky outside the window, as if he just noticed a celestial event no one else could perceive. His friends tried to breach the new, invisible wall around him. "Hey, Deku-kun," Achiko Uraraka said, approaching his desk during lunch, her usual bubbly energy tempered with a gentle caution. "Ida, Sue and I were going to grab some mochi from the cafeteria. Want to come?" Izuku looked up, and for a second, his green eyes seemed to glow with a faint, inner luminescence before he blinked and it was gone. "Oh. Hey, Uraraka-san. Thanks, but I think I'll pass. I have some new training exercises I need to work on." The rejection was polite, but it felt like a door being quietly closed. She could feel the distance, a chasm that hadn't been there before. He wasn't just their classmate anymore. He was something other. She still saw the kind, determined boy she admired, but he was now wrapped in a cloak of cosmic gravity that subtly pushed everyone away. Ida, ever the class representative, tried a more direct approach. "Midoriya-kun," he said, chopping the air with his hand in a gesture that was both earnest and stiff. "While I respect your dedication to your training, it is also important to maintain social bonds for optimal hero performance. We are all here for you if the events at the USJ have placed an undue burden upon your mental state." Izuku offered a small, tired smile. "I appreciate that, Ida-kun. Really. I'm just trying to get a handle on some things." He couldn't tell them. He couldn't explain that he was skipping lunch because he had to spend an hour meditating just to quiet the psychic hum of the entire city so he could focus. He couldn't describe the conversations he was having in his soul with a dead telepath from another universe about the ethics of molecular reconstruction. He was isolated not by choice, but by the sheer, unbridgeable chasm of his new reality. The one most affected, however, was Katsuki Bakugo. For his entire life, Bakugo's world had been built on a simple, violent hierarchy. There were the strong, and there were the weak. There were obstacles, and there was him, the force of nature destined to blast his way through them all to stand at the top. His rivalry with Izuku, the quirkless, useless Deku, had been the bedrock of this worldview. First, Deku was a pebble to be ignored. Then, with the manifestation of his quirk, he became an infuriating, inexplicable rival to be crushed. But what he had seen at the USJ had not just challenged his worldview, it had vaporized it. He had watched Deku do something that wasn't about strength, or power, or skill. It was an act of pure, casual godhood. You couldn't compete with that. You couldn't overcome it. How do you blast your way to the top when your rival can unmake the mountain you're trying to climb? His rage, the fuel that had powered him his entire life, was now mixed with a new, corrosive element, fear. It was the fear of irrelevance, and that fear festered, curdling his anger into a volatile, unstable compound. He avoided Izuku, his usual explosive taunts replaced by a sullen, brooding silence. He threw himself into training with a manic intensity, his explosions larger, more reckless, as if he could somehow make himself loud enough to be noticed by the universe again. The breaking point came during a heroics training session with All Might. The exercise was a simple rescue scenario in a simulated urban collapse. Izuku was paired with Momo Yaoyorozu. When a large section of a building was scripted to fall, Izuku didn't dodge or smash it. He simply raised a hand. The tons of falling concrete and rebar halted in midair, held aloft by an invisible force, before gently settling to the ground as if it were made of cotton. He hadn't even broken a sweat. Bakugo, watching from a monitor in the observation room, felt something snap. Later that day, he cornered Izuku in one of the empty corridors leading away from the locker rooms. The setting sun cast long, dramatic shadows down the hallway. Deku. Izuku stopped, turning to face him. He braced himself for the usual barrage of insults and aggression. But Bakugo wasn't shouting. His voice was low, dangerously calm. His red eyes, usually burning with explosive rage, were now narrowed with a terrifying, focused intensity. "That thing you did today," Bakugo began, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. "Stopping that rubble. And the thing at the USJ. The fire. The everything. That's not your quirk, is it?" Izuku's heart hammered in his chest. Kaken, don't you fucking lie to me, Bakugo snarled, taking a step forward, his posture radiating a predatory menace. I grew up with you, you shitty nerd. I watched you break your goddamn bones for months just to throw a ball. You were pathetic. Now, you're not. But that power isn't the same one you had before. It's different. It feels wrong. Izuku stayed silent. What could he say? Oh, hey Kaken. Turns out a cosmic entity of life and death bonded with my soul. It's pretty neat. His silence was all the confirmation Bakugo needed. The carefully controlled dam of his composure finally broke, but instead of the usual explosion of rage, what poured out was something rawer, something that sounded almost like desperation. All my life, Bakugo hissed, his voice trembling with suppressed emotion, I've been clawing my way up. Training until I puked, pushing my quirk until my arms felt like they were on fire. All of it, to be number one. To be the best. To prove that I was the strongest. He took another step, closing the distance between them until he was right in Izuku's face. Izuku could feel the crackling energy of Bakugo's spirit, a raging bonfire of ambition and pride, now flickering with the cold wind of fear. And then you just show up with that. A power that makes everything I've ever done, everything I've ever worked for, a fucking joke. A cosmic punchline. So you're going to tell me? Right now. He jabbed a finger into Izuku's chest, his voice dropping to a raw, trembling whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. What the hell are you, Deku? The question hung in the silent hallway, heavy and absolute. It wasn't a taunt. It wasn't an insult. It was a genuine, fearful, existential demand from a boy whose entire reality had been shattered. He wasn't asking about a quirk anymore. He was asking about the fundamental nature of the person standing in front of him. Izuku looked into his childhood friend's terrified, angry eyes, and for the first time, he felt the true weight of his isolation. He saw not a bully, but a drowning boy, his concept of the world swept away by a tidal wave that Izuku himself had become. And the most devastating part was that Izuku had no answer he could give. He didn't fully know what he was himself. He was a 15-year-old boy. He was the ninth holder of One for All. He was the host of the Phoenix Force. He was a jumble of contradictions and cosmic power, wrapped in a shell of anxiety and heroic determination. So he just stood there, in the deepening shadows, and said the only thing he could. I don't know, Kaken. The honesty, the raw vulnerability in his voice, did what no explosion could. It completely disarmed Bakugo. The tension went out of his shoulders. His clenched fists slowly uncurled. He stared at Izuku, searching his face for any hint of deception, but found only a profound, shared confusion and a deep, lonely sadness. Bakugo didn't say another word. He just scoffed, a short, bitter sound devoid of any heat, and pushed past Izuku, his shoulders slumped. He had come seeking a fight, a rival, an enemy he could understand and overcome. Instead, he had found a mystery that made him feel small, and a loneliness that mirrored his own. The number one spot seemed very far away, and for the first time, he wondered if the race was even worth running anymore. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden fingers across the city, painting the bustling streets of Muzurufu in hues of amber and orange. For most of its citizens, it was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. The hum of traffic, the chatter of students heading home from school, the distant wail of a hero's siren. It was the familiar, comforting soundtrack of a society protected by its costumed champions. For Izuku Midoriya, however, the city was anything but ordinary. It was a roaring, cacophonous symphony of life that he was constantly, desperately trying to tune out. He walked with his head down, the hood of his gray sweatshirt pulled low over his unruly green hair. He had taken to walking the long way home from the station, a winding route through quieter residential streets and small city parks. It helped. The fewer people around, the less psychic noise he had to filter. It was an exhausting, ever-present effort, like trying to have a quiet conversation in the middle of a rock concert. The constant influx of emotions, thoughts, and sheer life force from the millions of souls around him was a low-grade migraine that never truly subsided. Jean's psychic echo had been teaching him, in the quiet moments of his meditations, how to build mental shields, how to create a quiet room in his own mind. He was getting better at it, but it required constant focus. A single lapse in concentration and the floodgates would open, threatening to drown him in the hopes, fears, and mundane anxieties of every stranger he passed. Today, he was particularly on edge. A strange, discordant hum had been buzzing at the edge of his cosmic senses all day, a subtle wrongness he couldn't quite pinpoint. It felt like a string on a universal instrument had been plucked with malicious intent, its vibration resonating just out of sync with the rest of reality. He had tried to mention it to All Might, but had been unable to articulate it. How do you describe a bad feeling that originates light years away but is aimed directly at you? He turned a corner, entering a small, tree-lined park that served as a shortcut to his neighborhood. It was mostly empty, save for a few mothers with their young children at the playground on the far side. The discordant hum in his senses sharpened, the note of malice growing louder, closer. He slowed his pace, his hand instinctively clenching into a fist. The hairs on his arms stood on end. He was being watched. Suddenly, his enhanced senses screamed a warning. It wasn't a sound or a sight, but a sudden, violent pressure against his new awareness, like a fist slamming against a psychic wall. He dove to the side without a second's thought, raw instinct and the phoenix's precognitive whispers propelling him forward. The spot where he had been standing erupted. Not in an explosion of fire or force, but in a silent implosion. The concrete walkway, a park bench, and a small sapling simply collapsed in on themselves, crushed into a hyperdense, softball-sized sphere by an invisible, overwhelming gravitational force. Izuku rolled to his feet, his heart hammering against his ribs. His hood fell back, and his eyes scanned the area. 4 figures emerged from the shadows of the trees, strategically positioning themselves to cut off all his escape routes. They were clearly villains, their costumes a mixture of tactical gear and menacing, theatrical flourishes. But they weren't the disorganized rabble from the USJ. They moved with a chilling, professional synchronicity. One was a towering man encased in what looked like tectonic plates, his fists like stone mallets. Another was a lithe woman with long, silver hair that seemed to float and writhe with a life of its own. The third was a man in a sleek black bodysuit, his face obscured by a visor that pulsed with a faint purple light, the source of the gravity attack. But it was the fourth figure that made Izuku's blood run cold. It was Inomu. It was smaller than Terminus, leaner, its skin a pale, corpse-like gray. Its exposed brain was covered by a thick, bony plate, and its eyes, 4 of them, glowing with a dull, malevolent red, were fixed on him with an unnerving, predatory intelligence. Unlike the mindless berserkers he had read about, this one stood with a poised, calculated stillness. This was not a sledgehammer. It was a scalpel. Izuku Midoriya, the gravity villain said, his voice a synthesized, toneless drone. By the order of our benefactor you will come with us. Resistance is inadvisable. Benefactor, Izuku's mind raced. All for one. It had to be. This was his doing. He wasn't just a background threat anymore. He was actively hunting him. I'm not going anywhere with you, Izuku said, his voice low and steady as he slipped into a fighting stance. He made a conscious, deliberate choice. No, Phoenix. Not here. Not with civilians nearby. The playground was 100 yards away, but that was 100 yards too close for a power that could melt concrete into glass. He would rely on One for All and his own training. It had to be enough. He called upon his power, this time with a fierce, focused intent. One for All. 8%. Body only? No discharge. The familiar green lightning, a welcome and comforting sight, crackled to life around him. The red lines of power traced across his skin. This time, the golden fire did not surge to overwhelm it. It was as if the phoenix, sensing his clear and absolute intent, was content to wait, to observe, to trust the will of its host. The power felt different, though. 8% no longer felt like a strain. It felt comfortable, effortless. The constant regeneration and reinforcement from the phoenix had turned his body into a perfect vessel for OFA's power. Inadvisable it is, then, the gravity villain droned. He raised a hand, and Izuku felt the world suddenly become 10 times heavier. His knees buckled under the immense gravitational pressure. It took all of his 8% to just stay standing, his leg muscles screaming in protest. While he was pinned, the other two villains moved. The rock-skinned man charged, his footsteps cracking the pavement, his fist raised for a devastating blow. Simultaneously, the woman's silver hair shot forward, not as strands, but as dozens of razor-sharp, metallic needles, all aimed at his joints to incapacitate him. "They're not trying to kill me," Izuku realized with a jolt of clarity. "They're trying to capture me," he roared, pushing past the artificial gravity. He channeled more of One for All into his legs and jumped. The pavement beneath his feet shattered as he launched himself straight up, narrowly avoiding the rock man's punch and the volley of silver needles. In midair, he twisted, aiming a Delaware smash at the gravity villain. He flicked his fingers, sending a compressed air bullet screaming towards his target. The villain didn't even flinch. A shimmer of purple energy appeared in front of him, and the air bullet simply stopped, its kinetic energy completely absorbed. "Your abilities are well documented," the villain stated tonelessly. "Our benefactor provided a thorough analysis. Your quirk is kinetic energy. My quirk, Event Horizon, is the absolute control of kinetic and gravitational fields within my line of sight. You cannot touch me." As Izuku landed, the high-end Noma moved. It didn't charge with brute force. It flowed, moving with a liquid grace that was utterly terrifying in a creature its size. It closed the distance in a blink, its movements silent and precise. Izuku threw a punch, aiming for its head, but the Noma deflected it with an open palm, its movements eerily reminiscent of an advanced martial artist. It wasn't just strong, it was skilled. The Noma countered with a series of blindingly fast strikes, not with its fists, but with its fingertips, jabbing at Izuku's pressure points. Each jab sent a jolt of numbing, paralyzing energy through him. It was a quirk designed for incapacitation. Izuku gritted his teeth, his own training with Gran Torino kicking in as he dodged and weaved, trying to find an opening. But the creature was flawless, its defense impenetrable. It was like fighting a sentient, unstoppable wall. The rock villain and the silver-haired woman rejoined the fray, their attacks coordinated with the Noma's. It was a perfectly executed trap. The gravity villain limited his mobility. The Nomu engaged him in close quarters with a paralyzing quirk, and the other two provided ranged and heavy support. They were hurting him, wearing him down, giving him no room to breathe. Izuku was getting overwhelmed. A stone fist grazed his ribs, and even with OFA reinforcing his body, the pain was sharp and blinding. A silver needle buried itself in his shoulder, sending a wave of icy numbness down his arm. He was fighting a losing battle. He was fast, he was strong, but he was one boy against a team of highly specialized professionals and a bioengineered monster. His focus was beginning to slip. And the Phoenix felt it. A warm, golden glow began to emanate from his chest, a low hum resonating in the air. "Let us help," Jean's voice whispered in his mind. "Their lives are a threat to yours. Let us end it." "No!" Izuku shot back mentally, gritting his teeth as he dodged another paralyzing jab from the Noma. "I can't risk it." The playground. He could feel the children. Their bright, innocent life forces were like little shining stars on the edge of his awareness. He could feel their mother's gentle, protective warmth. The thought of his cosmic power lashing out, of even a single stray spark reaching them, was more terrifying than any villain. He clamped down hard on the Phoenix's power, forcing the golden light back down, an act that took a tremendous amount of willpower. But the distraction was costly. As he fought his own internal battle, the Noma saw its opening. It moved faster than he could track, and a gray, four-fingered hand clamped around his throat. It didn't squeeze to crush, but to hold. A powerful, bioelectric shock coursed through its hand, and Izuku's world exploded in a starburst of white pain. The green lightning of One for All sputtered and died. His muscles went slack. The world tilted, his consciousness fading into a roaring static. He was caught. He had failed. Achiko Uraraka was worried. She had seen the way Deku-kun had been acting, the distance, the exhaustion behind his eyes. She knew he was carrying a burden heavier than anything she could imagine. So, on a whim, she had decided to take a slightly different route home, one that passed by the small park she knew he sometimes cut through. She had hoped to bump into him, maybe offer to walk with him, to just be a friend and show him he wasn't alone. She had just turned the corner onto the tree-lined street when she heard it, the distinct, sickening thud of flesh hitting flesh, followed by a pained grunt that she recognized instantly. Her heart leaped into her throat. Peeking through the wrought iron fence of the park, she saw a nightmare. She saw Deku, his hero costume peeking out from under his torn sweatshirt, being held aloft by a monstrous gray creature. She saw the other villains closing in, their intentions menacingly clear. Without a second thought, she dropped her school bag and scrambled over the fence. "Get away from him!" she screamed, her voice filled with a desperate fury she didn't know she possessed. She slapped her fingertips together, activating her quirk, and charged. The villains turned, their expressions ranging from annoyance to mild surprise. The gravity villain, his attention momentarily diverted from Izuku, made a dismissive gesture in her direction. Uraraka suddenly felt weightless. Her feet left the ground, and she floated helplessly into the air. "A gravity quirk," the villain droned. "An amusingly symmetrical confrontation. You are of no consequence." But Uraraka wasn't trying to fight him. She was buying time. Her target was the rock-skinned brute. While floating, she reached out and slapped her hand against a large, decorative boulder that was part of the park's landscaping. The massive rock, easily weighing several tons, became weightless. With a determined yell, she shoved it with all her might, sending it tumbling through the air directly at the rock villain. It was a brilliant, desperate move. The rock villain, seeing the boulder flying at him, braced for impact, his own quirk making him nearly immovable. The boulder hit him and simply stopped, its momentum completely negated. "Release!" Uraraka yelled, pressing her fingertips together. Gravity reasserted itself instantly. The multi-ton boulder crashed down on the villain, not with the force of its flight, but with its own dead weight. The villain roared in pain as his legs buckled, the sheer mass of it trapping him, but her gambit had left her exposed and disoriented. The silver-haired woman sneered. "Annoying little gnat." Her hair lashed out like a silver whip. Uraraka, still recovering her balance in the air, couldn't react in time. The metallic strands wrapped around her ankle, sharp as razors, and sliced deep. She screamed, a sharp, piercing cry of agony. Blood welled from the deep gash, staining her uniform crimson. The shock and pain were so intense that she lost her focus, and her quirk deactivated on the boulder, which crumbled under its own weight, freeing the injured rock villain. The Nomu, still holding the semi-conscious Izuku, turned its head, its red eyes fixing on the injured, crying girl. A low growl rumbled in its chest. It seemed to perceive her as a greater immediate nuisance. With a flick of its wrist, it tossed Izuku aside like a rag doll. He crumpled to the ground, his body limp. The Nomu then took a deliberate, menacing step towards Uraraka, who was now falling, her leg bleeding freely. Izuku's world was a gray, fuzzy haze. The paralytic shock had scrambled his nervous system. He could hear distant sounds, Uraraka's defiant shout, the crash of the boulder, and then, her scream. Her scream of pain cut through the static like a bolt of lightning. It was a sound that bypassed his fried nerves, his failing consciousness, and struck him directly in the soul. Through blurry, half-open eyes he saw her. He saw her falling, her face pale with terror and agony. He saw the blood. He saw the Nomu, a gray specter of death, moving towards her with lethal intent. And in that instant, the dam inside him didn't just break. It was annihilated. The carefully constructed walls, the desperate plea to hold back, the fear of his own power, it all burned away, consumed by a single, incandescent, and utterly absolute emotion, a righteous, protective rage. The phoenix, which had been waiting patiently, felt the shift. It felt its hosts will change from a desperate plea for restraint to a singular, roaring command, "Protect her." "As you wish," the universe seemed to reply. A wave of pure, golden energy erupted from Izuku's body. It was not a fire that burned, but a wave of pure life force, a kinetic pulse of psionic power. The paralytic agent in his system was not just neutralized, it was molecularly disassembled, rendered inert and harmless. He shot to his feet, not with the crackle of green lightning, but with a silent, awe-inspiring surge of golden light. The air in the entire park grew still and warm. The leaves on the trees stopped rustling. The distant sounds of the city faded into an ethereal silence. The villains froze, a primal instinct screaming at them that the rules of engagement had just fundamentally and irrevocably changed. Izuku's eyes snapped open. They were no longer green. They were blazing golden suns, twin gateways to a heart of cosmic fire. He looked at Uraraka, hurt and falling, and then at the Nomu, the agent of her pain. A voice, ancient and terrible and beautiful, whispered in the back of his mind. It was not Jean Grey's gentle guidance. It was the raw, primal voice of the phoenix itself. To save life, sometimes you must wield the fire. Izuku didn't move. He didn't charge or shout. He simply lifted his right hand. The air in front of his palm shimmered and condensed, not into a sphere of light, but into a blade. It was a long, elegant saber forged from pure, solidified starlight, its edges honed to a monomolecular sharpness, its core a churning vortex of golden-red plasma. It cast a warm, beautiful light, but the villains felt an instinctive, soul-deep terror at the sight of it. This was not a weapon that cut flesh. It was a weapon that cut existence. The Nomu, driven by its programming, lunged. It was impossibly fast, its hand aimed to pierce Uraraka's heart before she even hit the ground. It never got there. With a movement that was faster than light, faster than thought, Izuku was there, between the Nomu and the girl. He didn't teleport. He simply was. He swung the blade of psychic fire in a clean, effortless arc. There was no sound of impact. No clang of steel or sizzle of burning flesh. The blade passed through the Nomu's torso as if it weren't there. For a second, nothing happened. The Noma froze, its forward momentum halted. It looked down at its chest, a flicker of what might have been confusion in its dull red eyes. Then, a thin, impossibly precise line of golden light appeared across its body. It widened, and the Noma split into two perfectly bisected halves. There was no blood, no gore. The surfaces of the cut were cauterized by pure, clean energy, sealed and sterile. The two halves fell to the ground with a wet, heavy thud, its life force extinguished in an instant. Silence. The remaining villains stared, their minds unable to process what they had just seen. The invincible Heian Nomu, a weapon designed to incapacitate the strongest of heroes, had been dispatched with the casual grace of a master swordsman slicing through silk. The silver-haired woman was the first to break, her professional composure shattering into pure terror. She screamed, a high, thin sound of utter panic, and turned to flee. No, a voice said. It was Izuku's, but it was layered, resonant, echoing with the power of 1,000 suns. He didn't move towards her. He simply raised his free hand, and the woman froze, held in place by an invisible telekinetic grip. She struggled, her silver hair thrashing wildly, but she was as helpless as a fly in amber. Izuku's golden eyes narrowed, and the woman's own eyes went wide with a new kind of horror as he reached not for her body, but for her mind. She felt a presence, vast and ancient, brushing against her consciousness, sifting through her thoughts, her memories, her fears, with contemptuous ease. The gravity villain, seeing his mission in absolute ruins, made a final, desperate move. He focused his quirk on Izuku, not to crush him, but to create a miniature black hole, a point of singularity to annihilate this new, terrifying threat. Before he could even fully form the thought, the psychic blade in Izuku's hand vanished, and he pointed a single finger at the man. A thin, laser-like beam of golden light shot out, striking the villain's visor. The visor, designed to help him focus his quirk, shattered into 1,000 pieces. The backlash was instantaneous. The villain screamed as his own power, untamed and unfocused, turned inward. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious and bleeding from his eyes and nose, his quirk broken. Izuku then turned his full, celestial attention to the injured rock villain, who was struggling to get out from under the remains of the boulder. The man froze, his face pale with terror. With the immediate threats neutralized, Izuku's focus returned to the one thing that mattered. He let the telekinetic grip on the woman fade, allowing her to collapse to the ground, sobbing and catatonic. He didn't care about them anymore. They were irrelevant. He turned, his golden eyes softening as they fell upon Uraraka. She had hit the ground and was now trying to crawl away, not from him, but from the carnage, her mind reeling from shock and fear. Uraraka-san, he said, his voice returning to its normal pitch, the cosmic echo fading. He took a step towards her. She flinched, instinctively recoiling from the radiant, terrifying power that now surrounded him. Seeing her fear was like a physical blow. He stopped, the golden aura around him dimming. He looked at the bisected gnome, the unconscious villains, the terror on his friend's face, and the full weight of what he had just done crashed down on him. He had wielded the fire. He had protected her, but he had terrified her in the process. With a visible effort of will, he forced the phoenix's power down, burying the sun back in his chest. The golden light in his eyes faded, leaving only his familiar, gentle green. He was just a boy again, standing in a wrecked park, surrounded by broken bodies. He knelt beside her, his movements slow and deliberate. "Don't be afraid," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It's me. I'm sorry." He looked at the gash on her leg. It was deep, still bleeding sluggishly. He remembered what Jean had told him, what the phoenix was. It was the force of life itself. He had used it to destroy. Now, he would use it to heal. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and gently placed his palm over her wound. He closed his eyes, not with a command to destroy, but with a pure, focused intent to mend. Heal her. Make her whole. A soft, warm, golden light emanated from his hand. It was not the terrifying, weaponized light from before, but a gentle, peaceful glow. Uraraka gasped, not in pain, but in wonder. She felt a soothing warmth spread through her leg, erasing the pain. Beneath his hand, she could feel her torn skin knitting together, her severed muscles reweaving themselves. In seconds, the wound was gone. Not a scar, not a mark remained. He pulled his hand away, revealing smooth, unblemished skin. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a desperate plea for understanding. Uraraka stared from her perfectly healed leg to his face. The terror was gone, replaced by a profound, overwhelming awe. She didn't see a monster or a god. She saw her friend, Deku, who had just wielded the power of the stars to save her, and was now looking at her as if he was afraid she was the one who was broken. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of fear. She reached out a trembling hand and placed it on his cheek. "Deku-kun," she whispered, her voice full of a wonder and gratitude that finally broke through his wall of cosmic isolation. "You saved me."